Tell me.
You got one hair out of place because we just talked to Derek James about having one hair out of place.
Derek James only has one hair.
How big a deal is it to tap into this market?
It's a great market. It's been a bit of a black hole. Not because there wasn't potential, but it's hard to go into a market without the security of having a local fighter. And a local fighter you can draw. I mean, it's one thing you can build Errol through, local club shows. But, to really have an impact, you got to get Errol to a place where he's nationally known, and then he's going to get attention. It's one thing to build a fighter in a small local market from ground zero. Then he can become something big pretty quickly in some of these smaller cities. But your city like Dallas, that has, MLB, that has NBA, that has NFL, putting Errol on at 10-0, 12-0, 14-0, it's tough to make an impact. So when I look at Errol, I think he's coming back to Dallas at exactly the right time when he can come in here and make a splash. I know he's wanted to fight here for a long time, but I think this is the best way to do it. And now, having made this kind of impact, he's now setting up the market for not just his benefit, but for others as well.
Do you think y'all laying the groundwork indirectly of getting to the real stadium, the big house?
Look, I would love to do that, and I'm sure I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I can think of some sort of hypothetical matchups that maybe could go in there. It's a little whiles off, but look, Errol's the guy that everyone seems to think he's going to be one of the sort of pillars supporting boxing over the next generation. So there's no reason why he shouldn't be able to do stadium fights in his home city.
Do fights like this make you a little bit nervous? Obviously, I know you're thinking ahead, the unification fights, Keith Thurman, Danny Garcia, Sean Porter. But Ocampo could come and ruin all that. So
that's why we love the sport. I mean, is because there can be a guy. I tell the story. Way back when I was working with Golden Boy Promotions, and he just signed Marco Antonio Barrera, and came into San Antonio, the Alamo Dome, with this Filipino kid that nobody knew, and it was sort of like, okay, do a quick fight, move on, and that Filipino kid, destroyed Barrera and became Manny Pacquiao. No one took that as a risky fight at the time. So there is never a short thing. When you have guys like Ocampo who have grown up without much, and are fighting for their livelihood, you can never sort of disrespect or take lightly a man who's fighting for his livelihood.
How big is the fact that Showtime's on everybody's radar? You got, of course, the Bible Network, HBO talking. You got UFC talking about y'all. How the fact that y'all on the forefront because y'all success and y'all in people's mouths?
It's great, and it goes back to really sort of investing in the fighters, because it may feel sometimes it's happened overnight, but it's been a process, of building the Charlos. The Charlos haven't been on any pay network other than us. They haven't been on any network other than Showtime. So it sort of feels like, they just burst on the scene all of a sudden over the last 9 months. We're doing 7-8 fights with them to get on. We've done 10 fights with Deontay to get him to this point. So it's a slow build, and then you get a point, and then it sort of says you get all these guys, this class of talent to a level where you've got Thurman, Garcia, and Spence, and Porter, and the Charlos, and Wilder, and it's sort of like, wow, all these guys have matured, at the same time, and then you get, a little bit of the golden era. I don't want to overstate it, but you got a really good era because you've got 8 or 10 named guys in their prime at the same time.
Steven, you talk about investing in these fighters. Is the goal still to try and create pay-per-view stars, or has that model kind of shifted a little bit?
I think the goal is to make them as big as they can. And fundamentally, our number one job is programming on Showtime. But if we do that really, really successfully, it's unavoidable. There's going to be some fights that are so big that they deserve to be on pay-per-view. So I think our bread and butter is still going to be Showtime. We'll go to pay-per-view when the fight deserves it, or when the circumstances deserve it. I mean, if it's a top-tier fight and it can't happen other than on pay-per-view, I don't think anybody begrudges it. I think where the it's bad for the sport and the fans start to push back and you guys start to push back is if you're putting fights on pay-per-view that are not premium fights, that are not top-tier fights. Fans have shown, boxing fans have shown, they will pay, for filet mignon when you give them filet mignon. But don't give them ground beef and charge filet mignon prices.
I get the sense that you're about to pull them away.
No, you got
Okay. Well, I just want to ask, just before you do have to go, what is the status with Deontay Wilder, Anthony Joshua? I mean, we hear it's been accepted. We hear contracts are being sent. Like, what can you tell us from the Showtime standpoint?
This is one. It's one that we're sort of a spectator in right now, because those two guys have to make a deal. We're fully expecting the fight will be with us. There's no one else who's been, building Joshua in the U.S. He has not appeared live on any network other than Showtime. With the exception of a Fox fight or two here or there, Deontay has been exclusively on Showtime. This fight deserves to be on Showtime pay-per-view. So, and I think both fighters realize that, promoters realize that. So we're sort of an interested observer, trying to help where we can, but there's obviously plenty of people, a lot of personalities, a lot in the media. We don't need to jump in and cloud the waters even more. So, we'll push and prod and, add our 2 cents where we think it's helpful. It has been a little bit of a slow process, but that's just because it feels like we're close. It's not one of those fights where it's like, when are we going to get it? It became a possibility really 6 or 8 weeks ago, which it feels like a lifetime, but wow. It's been really since April. So in the grand scheme of things, nobody wants a Mayweather-Pacquiao delay, something like that. But if we can get this resolved in the next, couple of weeks, then I think we'll look back and say, hey, that fight actually got made pretty quickly, given the stature of the fight.
Can a deal be made if it's not the next fight? Like, can they say, okay, we're gonna fight, but not until next year, and you have a fight, and we gonna have a fight?
It certainly can, theoretically,
but realistically,
it would. I would lose a lot of sleep over it, and I think there are others would, because we know, particularly the heavyweights, anything can happen. Doesn't matter who the opponent is, whether he's considered top tier or not. If it's Brazil, if it's Povetkin, if it's Tyson Fury, every heavyweight has a shot. So you don't want, there's a $50 million offer on the table. Now that's the U.S. That's a bigger purse than any heavyweight has ever gotten in history. And, Anthony is a smart guy. He's going to make his own decisions. But this is a big fight for both of them. And hate for something weird to happen and lose this opportunity for, a career-defining event.
Are you surprised they didn't jump on that? I mean, that's $50 million, a lot of money.
I understand, and AJ is a loyal guy. And, he's got a special connection with the UK fans. So I know he wants to repay them. He doesn't want to be a guy who disappeared, at this. For me, I don't think UK fans are going to begrudge him. I mean, all the times I've seen a Hatton fight in Vegas, British fans are thrilled to be there. No one really minds an occasional trip to Vegas. But I do think that both guys are sincere in their desire. There are some different priorities in terms of what they would like to see happen. But I think what you saw from Deontay this week is him basically saying, I will do this fight basically on any terms. Right. Here or there, underwater, the North Pole. I want this fight. And I'm not saying that AJ doesn't feel that same way, but that's sort of like, this was Deontay's way of saying, look, I just want to fight. It's sort of an old school attitude. It's like, tell me where to sign, I'll show up and fight. Right. This is the fight I want.
Assuming it is over in the UK, does that affect whether it's going to be on Showtime pay-per-view? Or
you can't have a pay-per-view at 2 o'clock over here in the States and think you're going to make money, right?
Well,
it is different. That is one of the possibilities. If that happens, then we'll do the best that we can. Could be pay-per-view, could be something else. But the hope is that it's done in a way that both audiences are satisfied that fans will get to see it at the right time, and without waiting, a year, 18 months, 2 years, which I don't get any sense that that's going to happen.
Hey, Steven.
Okay, guys, this last one, and we're going to have to get
How concerned are you that someone could rock the apple cart, so to speak? I mean, especially in the heavyweight boxing. I mean, that fight with Ortiz was no walk in the park, and you as the executive and trying to make these fights, and even with the Spence Jr. taking on an Ocampo, who no one really knows who he is, and one punch could literally change the world. How does that?
There's always a risk, more so than it seems like in any other sport, and particularly at the heavyweight division. I thought that the Wilder-Joshua fight was dead twice, in the middle rounds of the Klitschko fight and sort of in the middle rounds of the Ortiz fight. I'm sitting in my seat thinking, okay, well, back to the drawing board on that. So those are both top-tier opponents. It can happen at less than top tier as well.
Does it matter and just to play devil's advocate to the question, if one of them were to get a close loss, just from a fan base, how much impact would that have?
It loses a little bit of the luster. Look, it certainly doesn't become irrelevant. It's still a great fight. I'd hate for it to lose some of the momentum because that happens. And typically when you see particularly heavyweights, because of what happens when you see a loss in the heavyweight division, you're not usually jumping right back into the mix at the top tier. So I would hate for this not to happen, in the best possible timing under the best possible circumstances.
Can I ask one more question? Because I came in late. With this almost a sellout, or virtually a sellout, we talked last time about bringing more boxing back here and Spence being the face of boxing, or one of the faces. How excited does that make you feel, and to potentially bring more fights to the Star or to Dallas?
Well, the reality is he's really paving the way, not just for future Spence fights, but for future other fights, as well. Now, there have been AT&T Stadium fights before, but there's a special connection with Spence. The challenge has always been sort of who's going to do it first. It's chicken and the egg. How do you can't develop a market until you know there's a market there. If I can go to Barclays Center and get this gate, do I want to take a risk breaking a new market? It's tough. But here, with a hometown fighter, you're now getting a sense to say, look, Dallas can be a fight town, and that's something that will carry on far beyond Spence fights.
I noticed.
All right, guys.
Let me ask one question.
We spend a lot of time with Steven. You spend a lot of time.
I love Steven, though. I love Steven.
We can do more tomorrow.
One last one.
If he says it's all right.
Okay.
Good question.
I noticed Adrian Granados, you guys had some affinity for one another.
Yeah.
Can you speak to the side of boxing that we don't see? I mean, I'm fortunate that I get to see this side of the carrying part of Steven Espinoza and Showtime and fighters and Showtime. Can you speak to that so the fans can get a broad understanding?
Yeah, I mean, I say it like, again, we don't like to play favorites, but, we're all humans too. And Adrian is, because of his backstory, because of what he's done, both in and out of the ring, you just want to pull for him. And he's a guy who, you look at it, I mean, he's an incredibly tough fighter. He fights his, butt off every fight. He's lost by a hair, the slimmest margin. And, it's tough. And, you can see him, heartbroken, but he comes back and he'll take any fight. He's way smaller than Sean Porter, and he fought his butt off. So he's one of those guys, 6 losses makes no difference to me. I do have affinity. I think he's, a really great kid. Mm-hmm. He's entertaining, in the ring. And had he signed with, a big promoter, his career is probably going a different way. But he didn't have the big promoter. He was the opponent. You end up with some losses and get the short end of the stick, and all of a sudden you're here. But you're right. Like, I do have a soft spot in my heart for him, and I root for him, and I'm happy to put him on, happy to give him this opportunity.
And it's not just Adrian Granados. I mean, I've seen you before fights and after fights and during fights be very candid and open with other fighters.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, I can't, not connect with fighters. Absolutely. At least try to, because if I were in their shoes, I would want to hear from, have some relationship with a guy who's got an important influence over my career. I don't want him to be some guy in an office in New York who's making decisions that I've never talked to, don't know who he is, what he likes. So there are going to be decisions I make that are unpopular. I can't, please everybody. But I'd like the guys on our network to understand that we see them as people, not as assets, not as fighters, but as people who have goals and feelings and desires and have disappointments just like everybody else in the world.
What do you think was the Hail Mary that got Canelo to go out there tonight?
Good question. Wow.
If I could, I think it was a long game of chicken, and I think it's a really interesting part of negotiations is how far do you push that? You can push it too far, you can push it not far enough. This one, I think, and not just from what everyone said, my sort of sense of it, like gut feeling was they pushed it right to the brink, both sides. I don't think it could have been pushed anymore. There wasn't another financial arrangement. I think they were both sick of it, and it got closed at the right time.
Was that a really long answer, or was that two questions?
Who do you think wins that one, Canelo or Triple G?
I thought Triple G won the first one, but look, Canelo's strong. He's got youth on his side. It's a toss-up.
The guy loves to talk boxing. What can I tell you? All right, he's making my job hard.
Thank you.